Sup guys? With the new raid event, I wanted to double check some of my findings from before regarding Z52 and Fritz Rumey's equipment recommendations. While I was at it though, I thought, why not compare them to some of the other ships as well? Before getting into the test results, I first need to talk about this raid boss. She has medium armor and spends most of the battle standing still, but moves just a little bit in the second half of the battle. It also has a move where it pulls in your rear vanguard ship and keeps them there unable to attack, and if that rear vanguard ship has torpedoes, it could lead to jamming of all of your torpedoes. The other two vanguards are free to move and act as they normally would though. As a result, you can only test up to 2 vanguards at a time. Fortunately, there are no planes, so we don't have to account for that at all. I typically just left Eldritch in the rear for all of my tests, which increases the survivability of the other vanguards significantly. To begin with, I want to update my take on Z52's main gun options after gathering some more detailed results. Before, I said that the Twin 100 was slightly worse against medium armor, and there's really no reason to use it since you need it at plus 13 just to compete with a single 113, but it could be slightly better than the single 113 against light armor. However, after seeing the damage numbers, it seems that the difference between the two guns was greater than I thought, compared to when I just looked at the time. I can't say that I'm too surprised though, since I only took a couple of samples to get a rough idea, and I measured time to the nearest second, but a frame-by-frame analysis of the footage would have yielded more accurate information. All I really wanted to know at the time was that the 113 wasn't worse than the Twin 100, which was enough at the time for me to make the prescription that you might as well go for the much cheaper one. Anyway, looking at the damage numbers, we can see an increase of about 20%, going from the plus 13 Twin 100 to the plus 10 single 113. With such a wide margin, I don't think the Twin 110 would be better even against light armor, and you should just stick with a single 113 or single 76 at all times for Z52, especially when accounting for the extra heal she gets from faster guns. This is great news for poor players everywhere. Next, let's take a look at the comparison between Z52 and Plymouth. I'm only looking at personal damage, so I shaved off about 2% of Plymouth's damage, which would have been a result of Z52's universal debuff. Like I mentioned before, torps were unable to go off for a portion of the fight when Eldritch was restrained in front of the boss, but both Z52 and Plymouth hit the same number of torp reloads. I think both ships lost one salvo of torps though, which is a bigger loss to Plymouth, who doesn't have a preload, but I don't think it's too significant. For the record, I also did a run where I left the Vanguard AFK on manual, and the difference between the two without any torps was about the same anyway. Z52 ended up losing, but stayed within about 10% of Plymouth's damage on average. I guess one difference that doesn't really show up on the calcs between these two ships is the range of their guns. Z52's main gun does have 13 less range than the Plymouth gun, so she loses out on a bit of DPS when the Vanguard runs out of range for Z52's gun, but not for Plymouth's. Still, she's around the same tier, but I would say that she's a bit weaker as opposed to about the same in terms of personal damage output. And then, by extension, this means that Plymouth should win handily against light armor, but lose against heavy. Do keep in mind though that you need 360 gold gun plates to make a plus 13 Plymouth gun to get Plymouth to be this strong, but 0 gold plates are needed for Z52's main gun, which should be a relevant consideration for a majority of the player base. And of course, Z52 is also tankier, has a more impactful debuff, and much better anti-air and anti-submarine warfare, among other things. Okay, next, let's take a look at Rumey's gun. For these tests, I just left the fleet on AFK, so Rumey's damage comes entirely from her guns alone. The enemy barely moves, which is in favor of the Twin 150 because the spread causes shells to be super far apart at long distances, which can miss the spot they aim at. The difference in spread has nothing to do with how accurate a gun is at hitting a moving target. That has more to do with the shell speed. This time, the findings confirm the previous tests, which is that it doesn't really matter much which gun you use because it barely makes a difference. In fact, about 45,000 out of 55,000 of her gun damage comes from her ghost gun and firepower barrages without the light cruiser gun, and even more when you account for the firepower bonus she would otherwise get from having a gun equipped in her light cruiser gun slot. Just give her whatever. From these results though, given that the enemy is level 128, I think you can expect her firepower damage to contribute just under 1000 damage per second against a single target, if said target moves as little as this one. Okay, so I think these topics are pretty much settled now. At least I'm pretty satisfied with the information I have. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.